This shot is the opening shot for my new short film. The line in the poem for this was, "A mountain landscape with beautiful curves of a woman." First things first, import your reference. I use this image, but you can use any image you like with a woman lying on her side. To keep the proportions correct, I imported a character. The character I used was from CG Trader, which you could get for free. I would leave the link in the description. Next, we're going to add a plane for our mountain. So add a plane and scale it up in edit mode and subdivide it a bunch. Select one of the vertices close to the reference and using proportional editing, bring it up to make a mountain shape. And doing the same thing for the shoulders and the head. Then going to the side view and adjusting it as necessary to be as close to the reference as possible, but you could always adjust things to make it look the way you think is correct. So I'm just going to increase the size of the mountain a little bit, move it around until we get a shape that we like, but I ended up changing it throughout the project a bunch more. Add another plane. This is going to be our ground plane, so scale it up to the size of our scene. Something like that. Add another plane. This is going to be our mountain. Scale it up and subdivide it a bunch. And then just start playing around with it using proportional editing to get some kind of interesting shape. The shape doesn't matter too much, it's going to be a background mountain. Duplicate the mountains twice or 3 times for the background and rotate them, using proportional editing to adjust the shape further, just to have some variety so it doesn't look like duplicated mountains. In the camera's view, adjust the mountains further so it looks interesting from the camera. Next, I started working on the composition. I changed the aspect ratio to a 21:9 and used this resolution. I moved around the camera until I got something that looked about right, and I wanted to scale up the mountain a little bit, but I ended up changing it again later, but just to get the general idea. Now let's work on the detail for our mountain. With the mountain selected, add a new modifier, subdivision surface. Right click the mountain and click shade smooth. Add a new modifier, this time a displacement modifier. Click new texture and little icon on the side, texture setting. Change the texture type to clouds and increase the scale a little bit. With this mountain specifically, I ended up turning down the strength a little bit, but for the background mountains, I ended up turning up the strength. Select the background mountains and selecting our main mountain last, click Ctrl L and copy modifiers. Now all the mountains have the same modifiers. Click shade smooth for the mountains and that's it. Now for our ground plane, add a bunch of geometry. I ended up using loop cuts to have even geometry, but I subdivided it a bunch. Now the same technique we used before with proportional editing to change up the shape a little bit to make it just a little bit more dynamic and not just have a flat ground. In the shader editor, add a new material. Shift A, add a color ramp. Connect the color ramp to our base color and add a noise texture. Connect the noise texture to the color ramp. And on a color ramp, add another node so we can have extra colors. Make all 3 colors slightly different shades of brown, and at the end have it be a little bit brighter, and at the bottom have it be a little bit darker. Increase the scale of the noise texture and turn on the roughness all the way up in the principled shader, and then just play around with it. Add a little bit extra detail and turn up the roughness on the noise texture a little bit and moving around the nodes until we get some interesting result that looks good to you. Another important thing to do that I forgot to do right now and I ended up doing it later was change the principled BSDF IOR to 1. Select all the surfaces in our scene, clicking our mountain last, clicking Ctrl L and link materials. Now everything has our dirt material. Now we're going to add grass and trees to our scene. Select a ground material and enter weight paint mode. Paint a triangle from our camera to our mountain. So only whatever is in the camera's view would be grass. We don't need to have grass all around the scene, it's just going to make our scene heavier. Another thing I do is just paint a bunch of different varieties different weights on the scene, so it would look more natural and nicer in my opinion. With the ground still selected, go into Object Data Properties and change our first weight paint to grass. Add another one and name it trees. With it selected, go back into weight paint mode and start painting in different small blotches. This is where our trees are going to be scattered. I ended up changing the positions of the blotches later, but just to add some base right now. We're going to do the same for a mountain, weight paint, and just paint the edges wherever the camera could see, and again adding some variety in the paint so it looks more natural. The plugin I used for all the vegetation in the scene is named Geoscatter, and it is a paid plugin, but there are a few alternatives, and I left links in the description. One is using their free plugin, which has a nice variety of free assets, and another alternative is gathering the assets manually, which I will leave a link in the description for a few assets as well, and using the scatter modifier, which is new to Blender, to scatter the objects. But the principles stay the same, and that is to use two layers, one for the bushes and trees and another one for the grass. For the mountain, I added rocks, and also I added some dry grass, so there will be contrast from the ground to the mountain to make it just a little bit more interesting. Great, we are almost finished. Next we're going to be working on is the lighting. So add a sunlight. This is going to be our main light. Turn on the temperature for the light and turn it down to around 3000 to get a warm tone. Next we're going to increase the strength of our lamp to something very bright, around 100. Now in rendered view we're going to decide the angle of our lamp. So rotating it around the x-axis to get some interesting shadows, and also along the z-axis to change the direction of the light. Another important thing to do is in the world settings, change the color to black. Now you might be thinking that the scene looks a little bit weird. So to tie everything together, add a cube. In edit mode, scale it up a bunch. Select the front face and move it to the end of the scene. Scale it up again a little bit more, so it covers the whole scene. In the camera's view, make sure that the whole scene is inside of the box. In the shader editor, with our cube selected, add a new material. This is going to be our fog. Delete the principal shader and add a volume. Connect it to the volume, then turn down the density to 0.01. Next is to turn down the anisotropy, or however you pronounce that, to minus 0.01. If you followed until here, you might notice that the scene is a little bit bright or dark. The way you could fix this is by rotating the sun along the x-axis until you get a nice brightness. Of course, if you want to light the scene with an HDRI, that's also a valid option. Another thing to do if the scene is still too bright or too dark is to change the scale of the fog. So select your fog and scale it up and scale it down. Now one last thing I decided to change before I decided this render is final was to remove the character, as you could see, and also to move the camera back a little. Then you could see we have some parts without grass, so I just repainted the grass in, and that's it. If you guys get stuck during any part of the tutorial or have any questions, please let me know. I love hearing from you guys. Goodbye.